But much can be learned about Britain's current crisis by looking to America. In the United States, a similar predicament has been evident for the last 10 years, and some national figures are available. The seminal study of errors was made in 1989 by Professor Lucian Leape from the Harvard Medical School in Boston.
We looked at 30,000 records chosen from 50 different hospitals in New York State, and we found that nearly 4% of patients had an injury caused by treatment. And when we examined those, we found that 2/3 of those were caused by an error in care and therefore are potentially preventable.
Based on his extensive study, Professor Leape estimated the level of medical errors across the United States.
The numbers are really astounding. We estimate that there are 1.3 million patients who suffer an injury every year from treatment, and 180,000 people die. 180,000 is equivalent to 3 jumbo jets every 2 days. And if our figures are correct that 2/3 of these are due to errors, then over 100,000 of these are potentially preventable.
When the professor published his findings, he was ignored by most of his colleagues. How could a fellow doctor even suggest such things? Others claimed that his figures were distorted. They were, after all, only estimates. The study remained on the fringe of medical research for several years. Then, by chance, in September 1998, Andrea Gerlin, a journalist from the respected Philadelphia Inquirer, broke a story that was to change everything. A local Philadelphia hospital had recently gone bankrupt. Andrea Gerlin believed that the hospital was guilty of mismanagement, and she was determined to find out more. At the time, she had no idea that what she was about to find would confirm Professor Leape's estimates conclusively.
I was at the bankruptcy court where the bankruptcy case had been filed, and I was in a clerk's office, and I had been going through folder by folder and pulled out this document just as the next one in the pile, intending to be thoroughly bored. And when I opened it, I noticed in the back of the document were several hundred pages describing episodes that had occurred where patients had been seriously harmed or killed. And initially, I didn't know what to make of it because I'd never seen anything like it before.
What Andrea Gerlin had stumbled upon was like the uncovering of a mass war grave. There were some 600 injuries caused by medical errors in the 10 years up to 1998, including 66 deaths. The records gave a summary of each episode and the hospital's view of what had occurred. It was a catalogue of horrors. Incorrect surgery, wrong medications and misdiagnosis were just some of the listed mistakes. None of the doctors involved were subjected to disciplinary action, and none of the patients or their relatives were told of the errors. Andrea Gerlin was the first to break the news.
Was it ever reviewed? As I went through and contacted more and more of the patients, or in some cases their surviving relatives, it was an appendectomy. I found more and more who had not been told, who learned from me for the first time, who had suspected that something was wrong, but had never been able to follow through and get to the truth. And I felt that they shouldn't be hearing it from me. They should really be hearing it from the people who had had the original responsibility to tell them. And those people had let them down.
When Andrea Gerlin started to get calls from ambulance-chasing lawyers offering her money to take a look at the document, she knew this was something big. So with the important document under lock and key, the Philadelphia Inquirer published the story.
The response was overwhelming, and it was unlike anything I had ever written before. I could get nothing else done because the phone rang so constantly with responses from readers. And these ran the gamut from people who wanted to see me canonized to people who wanted to see me crucified. And they said things like, "Thank you, Andrea Gerlin, for finally telling us what we've all suspected for so long."
The burning question for Gerlin was, had she discovered a one-off house of horrors, or was this hospital typical? She compared the figures against Lucian Leape's statistics.
Its actual results fall within, close to the ranges that you would expect it to fall within. And That suggested to us very strongly that it was not an aberration, that it was not a place where horrible things were taking place that made it atypical, but in fact quite the opposite, that it represented the sorts of things that occurred at hospitals around the country.
Andrea Gerland's discovery confirmed Lucien Leape's nightmare. A profession devoted to care was killing its patients in their thousands.
We have not thought of medicine as being hazardous, and our findings show that indeed it is. And I think this came as a surprise to everyone. But you think of other hazardous industries such as aviation and nuclear power, chemical manufacturing, whatever, and yet you don't think of them as being unsafe because they have succeeded in making something that's intrinsically hazardous safe. Your chances of dying when you climb on a U.S. airliner are 1 in 3 million. Whereas if our figures are correct, your chances of dying from an accident when you enter an acute care hospital in America are 1 in 200.
These staggering findings have changed everything in the United States. In Britain, there is no reason to think the level of medical error is any different, but we're only just starting to wake up to the magnitude of the problem. There are no official figures for medical error, but estimates based on American figures suggest there are some 320,000 medical accidents or adverse events each year. These directly contribute to the death of 40,000 patients. That's 10 times more people than die each year on the roads. Leading British authority Dr. Charles Vincent has just completed a pilot study. The results showed that errors ending in some kind of injury accounted for 10% of all hospital admissions, much in line with Lucien Leape's US study.
Per annum. If you just do the arithmetic on the extra bed days, you find it comes out about 2 billion per annum. If half of those are preventable, there's £1 billion a year. We have reviewed 1,000 records, and we have found that 10% of them involve adverse events to the patients. These range from things that are really quite trivial, of no particular consequence to the patients, the majority maybe a couple of extra days in hospital with a minor infection or something like that, through to much more serious events involving a long-term disability.
The picture that emerges is that errors are being made at all levels by all medics, not simply by the incompetent. Can this really be the case?
Still within medicine, certainly in Britain, we haven't reached the stage of saying, yes, errors happen in a big way, we need to recognize this and do everything we can to reduce it.
The first step towards reducing errors is for doctors to talk openly about their own mistakes. But will they?